Now, you're welcome along on this Monday morning. In a moment, we'll chat with Miguel Delaney of the London Independent. Our football coverage is in association with Sky Sports, where you'll find more exclusive live sport than anywhere else, including the biggest Premier League games each and every weekend. Every golf major, every F1 race, the 2025 Ryder Cup, the Lions Tour, of course, Premier League darts, and much more. You can watch Sky Sports on Sky, or you can stream it on Now. Happy to say Miguel is with us. You're very welcome. How are things?
Not too much, not too much. Well, it feels like the season is at once getting both chaotic and yet a few key elements are quieting down given the title race.
I know. So 11 points clear, 11 games to play, 7 of which are at Anfield. That kind of crept up on
Yeah.
people a little bit. Arsenal liable to drop points in literally any game that they play. So this has been the weekend where everyone agrees it's done.
Yeah, I mean, Arsenal really need to put the pressure on. Like even 2 weeks ago when these sort of pieces are being put in place, at that point, like the equation seemed pretty simple. Arsenal needed to get maximum points. Liverpool needed to drop a few. There was a hint of that maybe because of the way the fixtures are going to fall this week. Then Arsenal go and suffer yet another massive injury. They're basically missing their entire first choice forward line. And now because of that and the way the results have fallen, it does feel like that's that.
And I'm disappointed, I have to say, because it was such a great first half of the season in that, well, I guess Act 1 was Liverpool looking really, really good, and that kind of meshed into Act 2 of the City collapse, which was,
Yeah.
so compelling as it happened. And you had the subplot of Manchester United's awfulness, and I was kind of ready for a third act. Here comes the title race. There's going to be a
Yeah,
twist,
yeah,
and
yeah.
we're not going to get it, I don't think.
Yeah, I mean, because I suppose there's another element to this, and maybe a slight irony in that, I suppose, given how City have shaped pretty much the entire league for close to the past decade, at least since 2017, there's almost this sense that, well, if City aren't there, maybe it's something more unpredictable. Instead, City aren't there. Liverpool have risen to a pretty high level, and it's the one season out of the last four or last three where Arsenal suddenly have dropped off. Um, so like City, like it's the one thing you would say maybe in that context that when they are on that form and they have a challenger, they sort of kind of demand challengers try go close to that level, even if they can't ultimately keep pace with them. Now, I don't think Arsenal's drop off is connected to facing someone else. I think it's just a coincidence of suddenly they faced all these issues at once. In fact, there is an argument that if you try and go toe to toe with City for anything more than a season, you will eventually feel an after effect. This happened to Liverpool twice. And I think it was maybe I don't think there's any long term concerns for Arsenal. I think there might just be a bit of an element of recharge after the season, pick out a few issues that they have to address. And obviously they're going to make at least three big signings in the summer. I think they will look in pretty good shape for next season. But of course, there's so much uncertainty, or it's very open about what's going to happen then.
So Man City nil, Liverpool 2. What did you make of it?
It was just a stroll for Liverpool. I mean, I was at the previous game, the December one. I wasn't at this one, and the previous one was an absolute destruction. Really, it was a 2-0 that could have been like anything up to 6-7. City were really lucky to get away with it. This one, it didn't get to that level of just utter superiority and those levels of humiliation. But in some ways, it was in its own way as bad, just because it felt as if Liverpool could just keep them at arm's length. And once they went ahead, there was really no sense. I know there was that disallowed goal, but there's really no sense that City were ever going to get back into it.
Yeah. And what a slap in the face as well for Pep. Twin false nines. I mean, I'm just playing at your own game here. So it was Jones and Szoboszlai, a continuation from Villa Park. And, she's a work to treat. Like you would think, how's that going to play out? But such is their running power that, I mean, and Szoboszlai in particular has done it all season. They can just run in behind at will and did.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I mean, there is kind of maybe a wider discussion there as well, in that a lot of the talk recently has been whether we're in the kind of the post Pep era. That there's different kind of principles coming back. It's all still based on what Guardiola does, but now it's about how much you kind of vary from that, how much adaptation um you can impose on that. And Slot is very much a Guardiola disciple, but it just feels like now he's taking things further. Whereas Guardiola is almost kind of now constantly trying to figure out an old problem. It feels we actually one of the oldest problems at all, which is how to regenerate a team amid so many questions about his own future.
I guess we should touch on Salah, albeit superlatives are running thin on the ground at this stage. His first goal, it obviously took a deflection. He smiled like a man who had tried that corner routine several times in training and it hadn't quite worked, but they said, go on, let's see if it happens. And then the second goal, like what's so impressive about him is the athleticism and the hunger, because at that stage City were fairly well matched up and it just took seriously hard running from Salah in behind Vardiol, and that was what created the opening. And like it wasn't a scenario where if you were Salah, you would think, when I run in hard here behind Vardiol, I'm going to get some real joy for it. It looked kind of like a thankless task, and he did it anyway. And then he did make
Yeah,
something
which he does.
happen.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, that's like it's one of the things with Salah, and like I think one of the more interesting things about his evolution over the past decade. I mean, let's not forget when he first arrived at Liverpool in 2017, he'd done well in Italy, but there was still that slight. I mean, I remember even one of his games for Roma where he played Real Madrid in the Champions League, and while you could see he was coming together as a player, he had something like six chances across the two legs and I think missed all of them. And they were all kind of one-on-ones. And it was still that central player who had pace that brought danger, but was unreliable. And I mean, first of all, within there was his arrival at Liverpool, and he immediately banished all that and became this finisher. Then, within about 2, 3 years at Liverpool, he became more of a kind of an all-round player, kind of adding this kind of creativity to his finishing. I think there was a stat that did the rounds this weekend that he's one of very few players in the Premier League to offer at least 15 goals and at least 15 assists in one season, which is quite Cantona like. Although of course one thing he has that Cantona doesn't. Sorry about my email there, gone. One thing he has that Cantona doesn't have is this immense running, and that has always been there, but it feels like it's been taken on to another level. And I suppose this actually feeds in to a wider point about his future, which is, of course, I mean, 'cause the only question, I think Liverpool would commit to everything here, were it not for the question about his age and how sustainable this is, which makes kind of the ability and willingness to run like that all the more symbolic. Not that he's doing it for that, of course, because this is just what he is as a player now. But I mean, and again, he only has to take off his top basically to kind of you can see how the incredible shape
yeah.
he's in. And he does at least look like a player who can go till his late 30s. That's not a guarantee. And this is one of the things that Liverpool have to factor is that, and I think one thing they've been thinking about is that when players get to their mid 30s, it is very possible that against all expectations they can suddenly just drop off,
Yeah.
or against all, despite kind of whatever happened the previous season. So that is why there's an inherent risk in committing too long a contract at a certain price for Liverpool. But given the development of Salah's career, given he didn't play all that much in his late teens, early 20s, say in comparison to other players we've been talking about, like Raheem Sterling, um, he does seem like someone who could justify that sort of contract.
Yeah, he does increasingly. And even the optics of just letting him go now, it's such
Yeah,
an unpopular thing to do, obviously, with the fan base. And that is a factor. But the thankless running, and he's not picking his moments when to run, it does suggest he really is feeling as good as he looks. And I agree with you totally on his evolution as a player. He has become more rounded each season. He was pretty much brilliant from the off. I mean, this is the fifth season at Liverpool where he scored 30 goals. But there are more aspects to his game. His finishing is more impressive than ever. The creativity absolutely has been a development. And what's really interesting about this season, I think, when a player stays on too long sometimes and there's a discussion about, he's tainting his legacy. This has been a
yeah,
season which has really elevated Salah's legacy. And there are now conversations, obviously, about the Ballon d'Or. And then even in Premier League terms, there's a general, and I'd be in the camp, I think, there's a general majority that have Henry as the best we've seen in the Premier League era with respect to Shearer's scoring record.
yeah.
And then it's like, who's next in the pecking order? And I guess on foot of this season, on the back of all his other years, like Salah's kind of elbowing his way up into that, like, well, there's a fair chance I could be
Yeah.
second kind of conversation.
But even actually, just as you're talking about it there, I was kind of thinking about if you compare him to Henry in that sense, and
Yeah.
like yeah, it's like there's almost this immediate assumption that Henry, because of achievement and also longevity, so like say Ronaldo was only in the league 6 years, but it feels like only three of those years are really kind of worthy of kind of that. Maybe even only well, three, say oh six or seven, but 06 or seven, he
No,
didn't quite go to
it's
the oh
two
07 or 08
years. It's
level.
2 years. It's
Yeah,
two
two
years.
years
Yeah.
at that kind of level, whereas Henry was at it for about 4 or 5. What so Henry arrived, it was either 99 to 2000. We didn't start to see the best of Henry till 01. So there was at least half a decade there. Um, Whereas Salah's kind of been at this level now from 2017 to 2020. That's 8 years. That is a long time to. Now, I suppose what complicates Salah's legacy is actually Man City, in that like because there's always that sense of someone is scoring so many goals to finish second in a lot of seasons just doesn't feel like it has the same impact because you want because when people talk about these sort of legacies, they want these goals to mean something more. That isn't his fault in this year. In fact, he's really kind of kept he sustained title races. Also, on the other side, if he wins the league this year, but he's actually matched Henry for titles as well.
Hmm.
Um,
I just,
and even if
I
he,
almost based the Henri thing in the eye test. He was just
yeah,
that awesome. He was just that superior. He was like legitimately unmarkable. It was just a level I haven't seen in the league before.
yeah. And there is still another element there though as well, which is at that point. So I mean, look, one of the reasons Henry even arrived to England was because he'd struggled in Serie A, and at that point, Serie A was still the absolute top of the game, as it would be, you'd say, until at least maybe the mid 2000s before Calciopoli. So England throughout Henry's time, and I'm generally not trying to belittle Henry here because we are talking. The point here is whether he's the greatest,
Yeah.
not whether not to actually do him down. So it's
And
you know
sorry,
what I'm saying?
are you pitching this as this is an Henri or Salah conversation? Is that where
Yeah, sorry.
Salah
Suddenly it's
has
become that.
so like Salah has elbowed his way that far up?
But there is actually there's an important context there. So when Henry was playing, because as you say, we're talking about someone who was so far above the rest of the league, but that was mostly in a Premier League that was at that point it started off in the fifth or sixth best league in the Europe. By the time he left, it was arguably the first or second. But in that time, like football's economy wasn't what it is now. It was still kind of there wasn't much financial gaps. Even then, I think the Premier League was still a lot earthier, a bit more English. Whereas what it is now and what it has been for basically all of Salah's time is this global Super League that, like, just by definition, just attracts the absolute what 90% of the best paid players or the best players in the game because it pays the best money. So Salah is kind of operating in an era that's more exacting almost. So he doesn't. So even if he's not say as high a level as Henri, and like theoretically, it's in a context where a lot of the players are closer. If you get me,
It's a very fair point. Yeah. Um, on Liverpool and the job Arne Slot has done here, it is remarkable. He obviously inherited an exceptional squad, and that is not the norm when a messiah figure leaves a club. I mean, just ask David Moyes.
yeah,
One point that Gary Neville has made repeatedly about Liverpool, which I really agree with, and I think it is interesting. He talks about them as being more relatable to the side he played in, as in there was more variety to how they went about their business. They could do all out attack for sure. They could play possession football for sure, but equally sit in low block counter attack style, very comfortable at that too. And the kind of side that will go away from home and just, let's settle in first 10, 15 minutes and let's play long ball and turn them. And these kind of old
yeah,
school values, but within a very sophisticated System. Whereas City in their pomp, and it was a hell of a pomp, it was just more one paced. Just their excellence was so excellent. They just, well,
yeah.
are we home or are we away? Is it a bottom five team? Is it a top six team? We're just playing the same way. And Neville has sort of said, I relate that the current Liverpool team, that adaptability, that's a football I recognise. He doesn't mean it as a slight, even though it sort of could sound
No,
like one.
but I think this ties into what we're saying about the potential, like the post Pep era in that sense. I mean, City were so successful because they were the best at the dominant form of football for almost 15 years, which is imposing your game on the opposition. It's that sort of, it's that positional game, high pressing, high possession. control. Obviously, there was nuances within it, but it was all anchored on that. And I think again, the slight irony is that Arne Slot's football is still anchored on that. Like that positional game is still the central principle, but there's more variation around it. They don't immediately use it to impose the game and think this is how we're going to win. I think I think the kind of throwback is interesting because that can work in a few ways. I mean, I wrote in November when I went to watch them play, and I think this is a game that actually indicates exactly what we're talking about. I went to watch them play Bayer Leverkusen at Anfield in the Champions League. So big, kind of a real kind of narrative around that match because it was Xabi Alonso who had been, tipped for the job ahead of Slot. Um, and Liverpool started the game. The first half was really it was very pedestrian actually, prosaic, and it was almost a sense of, oh, I remember the discussion at that point being Liverpool can be like this. It's almost like one half they're really unconvincing, the next
Yeah.
half suddenly they can turn it on. And it's true they can go through the gears in the game, but I think there's a bit more to it. I think it's exactly that. It's that variation that suddenly they can switch game plan. B, I think this is what I wrote on the night. There's something else quite interesting historical here because it's actually a bit of a throwback to Liverpool's own past themselves. I know this is going to uh, occupy, or this is going to take on a bigger discussion once they win the title, which they will, which is the shift from Shankly to Paisley. So that night, because I had it to hand, a lot of Paisley's quotes about how Liverpool adapted in his because under Shankly they went from this kind of charismatic force who won some league titles, some cups, and were obviously a presence at the top of the English game, but they weren't truly dominant. Then under Paisley, they went to truly dominant. Now, the first part of that, you can draw certain parallels, especially with a charismatic manager at the top. But what Paisley did was, is we realized when we went into Europe, we had to play a much more continental style game, which is about possession, and even possession basically as a way of teasing out a match, about strategy, and also about energy.
Mm.
And granted, that was in the days of much less sports science in the 70s. And it does feel like almost Slot's approach is a very modern version of that. And another thing about this season, and I touched on this in a piece I did last week about the injury crisis, is, and this is directly connected to Slot coming in as manager, how few injuries Liverpool have had. I mean,
Yeah.
that is as much as Liverpool's quality. That's been a major factor in how good they've been this season. Well, nearly everyone else has had some sort of meltdown. City have, Arsenal have, Tottenham have, Villa have. We're talking about all the kind of the challengers for top four last season. Liverpool have pretty much had close to a clean bill of health, or as close as you can get. And part of that is because of some of the staff that Slot has brought in, like Peters, but also the switch from, and I think there's something really interesting here in terms of the way how the Premier League goes in the future. From what people have said to me, the switch from a, an approach that can primarily be manager led to one that where the manager fits into a performance led club. Performance led meaning basically almost every such decision is dictated by the science and the highest possible preparation. Now, I know people would think that they'll be taken for granted in a modern game where so much is dictated by the sports science. But the truth is, with a lot of clubs, they'll the kind of it still be the manager that ultimately makes the call.
Mm.
And I think we can link that to some of the injury issues this season, where because for a manager, there's always that temptation to kind of we'll have that training session where I fine tune this idea a bit more, or this is a tough game, we need this player in. Whereas at a performance led club, that doesn't happen to the same degree, and I think Liverpool have been much more composed.
You mentioned briefly there at the top that you think Arsenal will rebound quite well from what is just a bitterly disappointing season. I mean, this is the year that Man City decided to abdicate and they just weren't there. And they
Yeah.
were poised to be there. So it's probably a very painful, almost destabilizingly painful kind of a performance from their point of view. But there does seem to be a fair degree of faith in Arteta at the club. He seems very stable. It's not like there's an exodus of players on the horizon. So you said you reckon 2-3 big signings in the summer. So Arsenal actually next year could be poised again.
Yeah, I mean, look, this is especially when Liverpool win the title. I think there's going to be a lot of discussion around Arteta
Yeah.
and this sense of like, hang on, you like because if you zoom out, it does just look bad. Basically, that having pushed City for 3 years, the sense was and one of the kind of arguments constantly around Arsenal, well, if City weren't there, they would be the best team in England, and then suddenly City aren't there, and Liverpool jump in ahead of them, and just on its own, those bare facts look bad, and they do look bad. I think there is a bit more to it. I think just the way the season has gone, the injuries. I think we've probably maybe they've denied us a proper title race in that sense between Arsenal and Liverpool, and kind of an old-fashioned title race in that way, given everyone's memories in 1989 and all this. Uh, but that said, that the injuries don't happen in a vacuum. I think Arsenal will have to assess a few things from how they've approached this season, maybe how players have been used. You only have to look at the number of minutes Kai Havertz had, um, and
And
I suppose.
Saka as well. I mean, he's been an injury
Well,
waiting to happen.
exactly, yeah. And I suppose, I mean, so one of the issues that happened this season with them as well was say some of the decisions they were making in the summer, basically, where they saw through about five or six main attackers.
Right.
They'd scored over 90 goals in the Premier League this season or last season, with that only building on from how good they looked in attack in 23. And I suppose at that point, when you suddenly had attacking coming from everywhere, that was maybe Arteta's ideal Arsenal. So I think from that they took a bit of a calculation in the summer and thought they could persist with these five or six attackers without necessarily making signings because they were going to wait for the absolute ideal signing.
Okay.
I think there was a fair logic to that, but there was a risk to it, and that risk ended up really costing them really badly because suddenly, for the first time in 3 years, they had injuries to all their forward line. In two cases, with Saka and Odegaard, long-term injuries. Even with Odegaard, it doesn't feel like he's actually properly recovered yet. He hasn't been at the level he was before that ankle injury.
Hmm.
So they paid for that calculation really. So they're going to have to kind of reassess some of those decisions. But I don't think it's not like there's anything wrong with the team or how they approach it. It's just like because it's not like they've dropped off because Arteta's football doesn't work anymore. Yes, he's had to make compromises out of injuries, and I think there have been a lot of occasions maybe Arteta's inclination is to go a bit too pragmatic when he doesn't have his key players. But still, if Arsenal have their best 11, we're talking about a really good side, and it's now a really good side with a lot of other options, which is why I think they will be strong next season. And I
Hmm.
think in the summer, so they'll Zubimendi from Real Sociedad is pretty much done. They're going to go for a forward, and this time they will make sure that they get one, I'd say, because they can't. Otherwise, it's 3 windows or 4 windows since they've left this. Everyone's talking about Isaac. I think that would be kind of a dream for them, but I just can't see it happening because of how much Newcastle would want. Um, I think Sesko's from Leipzig is a more realistic option. And also Arteta does like that kind of physical forward. Yeah, Sesko, I'd imagine, or something along that profile. They'll do a wide forward as well. Nico Williams is the ideal for them, but I think Semenyo at Bournemouth could be
Yeah.
Antoine Semenyo could be, yeah, like suddenly he's come on
Yeah.
as someone who's one of the revelations of the season this year. And actually, there's a more interesting discussion we had about how many of the season's most entertaining players have been outside the traditional or the wealthiest six. Um, but yeah, it'll be those three at least. I think maybe a fourth. And I think so. Once they get to the summer, and that informs some of the decision making this year, Arsenal will be in a better shape. And
Yeah.
hopefully, then for next season, actually, it is one of those title races where you've actually got a few good teams rather than one outstanding
I know.
team.
It's why just such a strong sense of can we wrap this up? I know it's February. Can we
Yeah,
fast
I
forward
know, I
through to
know.
August here? I mean, Manchester
But
United have binned off this season. Let's
but
let's talk
but
about
the only thing
this.
with that is
Yeah.
the only thing with that, like, there's a few interesting elements to it in that. I think the Champions League chase now is suddenly very interesting because no one wants to seize it, and the Champions League itself because of the way the draw has fallen. Whereas like the team that usually wins are Real Madrid are on the most difficult side,
Yeah.
and it's a little bit open.
No, it is. Well, Champions League might save us. There is that.
Yeah,
But Manchester United, there's no saving them. I mean, this is just chronic in so many ways. They were 2-0 down to Everton at Goodison. It was just another awful performance. And then they rallied. Kind of a wild stat with them that in their last 17 games, they've managed 1 goal in the first half and 22 goals in the second half. What do you make of Ruben Amorim? I'm not going to change anything ever, no matter what. This approach is starting to wear thin. I mean, I could now go in as Manchester United manager, say this is my formation, and then just close my eyes.
Yeah. like it does feel now like as if it works. It would work in a very specifically tailored system that had built an entire club towards that. Say a little bit like what Manchester City did for Pep Guardiola before his appointment in 2016.
Yeah.
But obviously, Manchester United at this point are close to where Manchester City were in 2008 rather than 2016. And suddenly they've dropped in a manager who has to deal with like a squad that just, it's not just not built for him. It's been built for like multiple different managers preceding him. And hence, that's one of the reasons they're in this mess. So it does feel like it's potentially a great manager, just in completely the wrong situation now, which means everyone has to just weather it.
And he's also, but I'd put it to you, he can't be especially great if he can only operate when things are near perfect for him all around him.
I suppose, to be fair, I suppose he'd say it's not about near perfect. It's more about like the extent of what has to be fixed. It's just like it's the extent of what the issue is the club, and then there's a bigger question of, well, if you needed this much work, why do you go for such an ideologue?
Yeah.
Because and like this touches on some of what we were talking about with Slot as well. It does feel like as well there's a little bit of a split now in management between these kind of ideologically dogmatic coaches, Postecoglou being another, and kind of those who are willing to adapt to it more, like Areola, who's become one of the revelations of the season, the result of the weekend notwithstanding. But it's interesting as well. Like this is something that people have started to discuss a bit more. This time last year, when it was becoming clear that Alonso was unlikely for Liverpool, Amorim was for a while talked about as the top choice there. But one of the concerns that Liverpool had, well, it was not really a concern, but I think one of the issues that swung it for Slot was basically that he was willing to be much more adaptable.
And I think, like, I can't even believe that the ideologues would think they're the superior force here. I mean, to I guess hark back to Ferguson, which increasingly is, kind of less relevant, but it's still relevant. Does like one of the most adaptive managers we've ever seen. He'd do it whatever it takes to win the game. And here we have this kind of finely tuned thoroughbred. Oh no, I'm not adjusting anything here. It's my way or the highway, regardless of the evidence, week after week after week after week. Like, is nobody able to sit down with Amorim and say, this isn't working? Like at a certain point, we'll give you patience. But if these results get so terrible that the fans turn on you and this thing becomes toxic, then despite our assurances, we can't protect you anymore. And also, Amorim he can't go into the summer weakened. Are Manchester United going to say, well, this guy has won virtually no games. He doesn't seem very adaptable. Will we repeat the old Ten Hag trick of giving him 200 million when there's a chance we'll have to sack him in October when he's been booed at Old Trafford? Like, he needs to play the game a little bit here.
Yeah. I mean, so the argument from the ideologue's point of view has always been that you've got to, and this is always thinking like it was similar as actually said in Guardiola's first season, 2016-17. You've got to get through the difficulty because it's a learning process, and the reward is that when a team gets it right, it has a multiplying factor. So it can be better than any possible team that is more pragmatic. And I think there has been a fair argument to that for the last 15 years of football.
But don't you have to pace the learning process?
Yes, which is another side of it. But equally, there is an argument right now that, forget about Manchester United for a minute, we'll come to that in a second.
Yeah.
Suddenly, in a new world of football where the wealthiest clubs are invariably going to be in a lot of competitions, that's in a world now where European competition has expanded. There's Club World Cups. There's no give in the calendar. We've already spoken about injury crises this season, and that's suddenly where ideologues have a problem because they just don't have the same players to play their system all the time. So they have to be more adaptable. This has been one of the deciding factors this season. So that's another reason that we could be coming back to a more kind of pragmatic manager. So that's one kind of big massive factor or massive kind of shaping element here. And then of course, yes, the other side of that is Manchester United. And like for all we talk about, it really does come. Actually, I posted this on Saturday as I was watching the game. It really does come down to something quite simple. Can you keep losing matches? I posted that one when it was at 2-0. He did come back.
Yeah.
But I mean, ultimately, he didn't lose the game because of a fine line refereeing decision, and that's possibly a generous description of it.
You have great contacts in the game. I'm curious for like the mood around the club because from the outside, it clearly doesn't look good under Ratcliffe. I mean, the latest story and there are just endless stories like this, obviously.
Yeah.
So it's soup and sandwiches only for non-playing staff, including the management. That is what the canteen will give you: soup and sandwiches. There's things like the under-18s. We're not letting you play at Old Trafford as is tradition for this FA Youth Cup match, and that will save us £8,000. This and impending further redundancies to come. I'm presuming this is not like the media cherry picking the most Victorian Ratcliffe moments. I presume that is representative of a club where everything feels impossibly grim.
Yeah, and where basically they're trying to now, again, the generous description there is they trying to basically they're looking at avenues where they can cut costs basically everywhere. And that has, I mean, the phrase you hear a lot around United, and this has been doing the rounds for months, is it's a climate of fear right now.
Right.
Everyone's afraid for where cuts will come for their jobs, and that obviously feeds into a wider uh, atmosphere in the club that can eventually get to the players, as we've seen. Now there are two things to this. One, it's interesting because even not like James Ducker did a brilliant piece for the Telegraph Friday, laying out a lot of these cuts at the moment or on Thursday, and even that, as a lot of people say, oh, United probably did need as a club, they probably just needed a little bit of kind of shaping. There's a potential people that got too comfortable. Fair enough. That still doesn't necessarily translate into what's happening now, which is cutting everything. And like ultimately, especially given this is football and so much of the cost is on the pitch, it really is just difficult to square the potential savings you make with some of these cuts with the amount of waste that goes in the pitch. I mean, some of the what's like the potential return from some of these savings that can almost be saved from one player contract. And at United, it's a player that's very readily dispensable. I think that's what feels like such a kind of that only adds to the glue and the real life consequences for everyday people of losing their job or having elements of their job changed. And then they know, then they see what's on the pitch, the expenditure there,
Mm.
players not used, even send some of the executive. I mean, how much did it cost to the club to not make the decision of changing Ten Hag in the summer? Or then obviously there's so much was made of the Dan Ashworth thing. And this is where you feel like it's a bit of a false economy. And there is, of course, another element to that because of exactly what we said, where these cuts actually start to debilitate performance on the pitch because of the atmosphere around the club. Um, but it's funny how this is now beginning to provoke bigger discussions of that Ratcliffe and the Ineos empire because it's again more and more people are talking about how well cutting companies down like this has been a Ratcliffe standard. It's a general approach, but then equally, has it translated to that much high performance in sport? The results are very mixed.
Yeah, it's
Sorry.
it's fascinating. Before you go, I know you were there because I saw you post about it. But did the camera pick you out at Tallaght Stadium on Thursday? I could have sworn at one stage that your doppelganger was there, looking kind of tense into the crowd. Was that you? Was that you on screen? Did you get text messages?
I didn't see that actually.
Okay.
I was sat there. I went with my brother's-in-law and Shamrock Rovers fan. So he took a few of us. It was
I
yeah,
think
we were sat near the corner flag, actually just down from the press box.
I would have bet my
I
life it
didn't
was
get any.
you. I mean, the camera was busy picking out celebrities like Johnny Sexton and Damien Duff. So I suspect when they saw Delaney, they zoomed in tight. So you can't move at the moment for like your colleagues across the Irish Sea writing pieces about the unstoppable rise of the League of Ireland. It's been noticed over there, and even I had somebody from the Guardian on looking for Mason Mealy's agent's number, and
Yeah.
people want to write pieces about it. So it was. I mean, it was a really good occasion. It felt like watching on TV. It was a very even match. It wasn't.
Yeah.
Oh, we have to sit back and defend because we're in Europe, and it was just a good, lively occasion. You've obviously been paying heed to the League of Ireland revolution.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like it's funny not to immediately jump to something that immediately jump to an out of self-promotion. But given I've just done a book on basically I suppose the modern political economy of football, a lot of these issues, the game, states of play, call by the way.
Yeah,
But like
it's
in that book, I do
it's
discuss,
still in all good bookstores.
yeah, yeah. But in that book, I do discuss how one potential outcome of all this is a resistance to what football is becoming and all these wider issues,
Yeah.
and people. being drawn more towards a more authentic level of sport. And I mean, what else could you call a game between Shamrock Rovers and Molde as a more authentic level of sport? I mean, Rovers are a club basically. Rovers were one of the first great victims of modern football, given they almost went out of existence, given what happened to the early 2000s, and that was directly connected, say, to Irish football's the lack of investment in Irish football because the way sport in this country was engineered. Molde, okay, fair enough, they have there is money behind the club, but they're also from a football culture in Norway that has similarly resisted modern football. They vote on elements like VAR. Their federation, through President Lisa Klaveness, was one of the few actually critical of Qatar and all this. So both these clubs themselves represented kind of, I think, a level of authentic. Again, Rovers actually reborn by the fans, and that two clubs that really represent their community in that way. And in a Europa conference, that feels like if it were, and this is the pity of it, if it weren't for like the unnecessary presence of clubs like Chelsea and Fiorentina in a competition like that, it would feel really open. And again, I was reflected by, packed stands, which is like a follow on from the League of Ireland, which is, as you say, going through a boom. And I do think all this is connected, that it's a bit more, it's a little bit more about what football is supposed to be about and all these kind of, than all these other elements that surround the top level, which isn't to take away from the players and what we've been talking about, because ultimately it's still about the players and the managers at that level. But the top level is surrounded by so many more complicated issues and morally complicated discussions.
Yeah, well, there's no doubt, like the football in the Premier League that we're watching is just of a level that we've never seen before. I mean, it's ridiculously good, and yet anecdotally, and it's hard to measure these things, but you absolutely do hear common refrains like, the whole thing is just so sanitized.
Yeah.
Like just, screw those guys and the money they're earning. It's just gross. It's off-putting. It's just why would you want to like kind of be surrounded by that when you've got something which, as you say, is a bit more authentic? That urge is very much out there and very understandable.
And there's another. So as during the game, I had a colleague from England message a WhatsApp group saying, I won't name him just in case he gets some backlash, but this is fun, but it's a bit like watching a League One match. And fair enough, I think. Look, I don't think people in the League of Ireland, they would. I know there's been debate about kind of Hamer's comments and all this, but yeah, like fair enough. Generally, it's probably around League One level.
Yeah.
But this is another thing I've come to think about, and it's actually something that struck me as well, having done, say, when I've had to cover the Women's World Cup, where you see discussions about, it's just not the same level as the men. The level of football actually doesn't matter that. I mean, what point is the level of football if it just means Manchester City get 95 points or Bayern Munich win 12 out of 13 Bundesligas? Like, I mean, suddenly your level of football becomes, well, you're actually kind of destroying what sport is supposed to be about, which is just a sense of competition, if that's the case. And it's why, I mean, football is only kind of as compelling as its competitiveness, which and that is, I think, what we're seeing, because even the further down the pyramid you go, and another classic case of this is actually what happens in the Championship in England. The further down the pyramid you go, there is less financial disparity because everything's bunched together more. I think the Conference League is a perfect example of that. Because again, Molde, they are a wealthier club than Shamrock Rovers. But look at how Shamrock Rovers leveled the game and will feel maybe a little bit of a lost opportunity at not getting through.
Yeah, for sure. Miguel, that was great. Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Cheers, Joe. Thank you.